I recently faced any son's worst nightmare. The HOA president, Brenda Miller, slipped into my dad's hospital room and tried to pull his ventilator. Her excuse? She tried passing herself off as clergy to pray. Funny thing is, the only visit she got in the end was to the police station. But let me start from the beginning. The first thing I remember is the quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, but the day-bright, humming quiet of an ICU. It's a sound made of soft beeps from the heart monitor, the gentle hiss and click of the 4 drip, and the rhythmic, metronome-like push of the ventilator breathing for my dad. For 2 weeks, this had been the soundtrack to my life. I was running on vending machine coffee that tasted like burnt plastic and 3 hours of sleep in a chair that was designed by a monster. My name is Ethan Hayes, and my dad, the strongest man I've ever known, was lying in that bed, helpless. He was my grandpa's son, and that line of stubborn, gritty men was supposed to be unbreakable. Yet here we were. The doctor said it was a severe pneumonia that had gone septic. They said he was fighting. I knew he was. I just had to be there to make sure nothing got in the way of that fight. I had been sitting in that stiff vinyl chair for hours, my eyes gritty, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. It was 3:55 in the afternoon, during shift change. But the head nurse, Clara, knew I wouldn't leave. She'd just nod, her expression calm and sharp, and bring me an extra blanket. I'd gone to the cafeteria for 7 minutes a land speed record for a cup of terrible coffee. And when I came back, the room felt different, colder. And she was there. Brenda Miller, president of our homeowners association. She stood over my dad's bed, a vision in a light pink knit top, her blonde hair in that perfect, severe bob she always wore. She had a fake smile plastered on her face, the kind that never, ever reached her cold, calculating eyes. In her hand, she was holding a laminated visitor badge on a flimsy chain. It looked wrong, too bright, too clean. It looked fake because it was. She hadn't seen me yet. Her back was mostly to the door. Her focus was entirely on my dad, or more specifically, on the tangle of tubes and wires that were keeping him alive. My mind, sluggish from exhaustion, tried to make sense of it. What was she doing here? We weren't friends. We weren't even friendly acquaintances. My dad had been organizing neighbors to question a massive, unnecessary special assessment she was trying to push through for a new front gate. He thought she was a bully. I thought she was a petty tyrant who got a thrill from measuring people's lawns with a ruler. Then I saw her hand move. It was slow, deliberate. It moved past the 4 line, past the heart monitor leads, and went straight for the main ventilator tube connected to the intubation pipe in his throat. My coffee cup slipped from my hand and hit the linoleum floor with a dull thud. The sound was nothing compared to the roar that filled my ears. Time seemed to stretch and then snap back into place. Her manicured fingers, with their pale pink nail polish, were closing around the thick, corrugated plastic of the tube. She wasn't just looking. She was touching. Her knuckles were white. For a split second, I saw my whole world ending right there in that sterile, beeping room. My protective instincts, that deep, primal need to defend my own, took over my body. There was no thought, only action. My legs were moving before I decided to run. I lunged across the small room, my hand slamming down on the big red button on the wall next to the bed. The code gray button. The one for an immediate security lockdown. The world exploded into noise and light. A deafening alarm blared through the room and out into the hallway, a piercing, cyclical shriek designed to signal absolute crisis. A bright, flashing strobe light on the ceiling began to pulse, painting the room in frantic strokes of red. The heavy door to the ICU room slammed shut with a solid, echoing boom, followed by the loud, definitive clunk of a magnetic lock engaging. Our ICU doors auto-lock on code gray. We were sealed in. Just me, my unconscious father, and the monster in the pink top. Brenda whipped around, her face a mask of shock, the fake smile gone, replaced by a snarl of pure fury. Her hand recoiled from the tube as if it were on fire. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice a shrill, pushy weapon, the one she used at HOA meetings to shout people down. I didn't answer. I just stood between her and the bed, my arms out, my body a human shield. All I could hear was the alarm, the frantic beeps of the heart monitor, and the blood pounding in my ears. I could hear fists pounding on the other side of the door, voices yelling. They were coming. Help was coming. But for a few terrifying seconds, it was just us. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul that I had just stopped something horrible from happening. The lock on the door made a loud buzzing sound as it disengaged from the outside. The real fight was just about to begin. The door buzzed. Brenda hissed, "Move," and grabbed the four-pole like it was a spear. I slid it out of her hands and kicked the wheel brake. The heart monitor spiked beep, 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 then steadied. "Don't touch him," I said. My voice was flat, cold. She tried to step around me, but I planted both hands on the rail and stared her down. I could see my dad's chest rise. Fall. That breath was my line in the sand. Knuckles hit the door again. Voices, keys. I kept my body between her and the tube. She smiled, tiny and mean. "Rules are rules," she whispered. "Not here," I said. "Not today." The lock thumped. The door flew wide. The heavy door flew open and slammed against the wall stop. Head nurse Clara was the first one through, her usual calm replaced with a sharp, focused intensity. Her eyes scanned the room in a fraction of a second. My dad, the monitors, me, and then her gaze locked onto Brenda Miller. Right behind her was Officer Grant, a young officer built like a linebacker, but who moved with the quick, silent grace of a cat. His face was a professional mask, but his eyes were wide, taking in the flashing red lights and the screaming alarm. He saw my stance, say a human wall in front of my dad's bed, and his expression hardened. The hallway behind them was a blur of motion. More nurses, 2 more security guards, and the first police officers arriving on the floor, their radios crackling with urgent, coded chatter. The officers' faces twisted in disgust. The sterile, quiet ICU had become a chaotic, crowded stage. She tried to touch his ventilator. I yelled, my voice raw, cracking with adrenaline and rage. My finger was shaking as I pointed at Brenda. "She doesn't belong here. Get her out." Brenda, seeing the uniforms, immediately shifted tactics. Her shock and anger morphed into a performance of wounded innocence. She'd flashed a visitor badge downstairs. Now her purse hung tight at her side. "This is a misunderstanding," she screeched, her voice pitching higher, trying to sound like a victim. "I'm a family friend, a concerned neighbor. I was just praying for him." Clara cut her off, her voice low and colder than the sterile air. "This unit is restricted and you are not on the approved visitor list, Ms. Miller." Clara knew. She knew everything that happened on her floor. Officer Grant didn't wait for a debate. He moved forward, his steps sure and heavy on the linoleum. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me now." Brenda balked. She puffed up her chest, the light pink top seeming to inflate with indignation. "You can't do this. I am the president of our homeowners association. I have rights," she snapped, as if that title was a diplomatic passport that worked everywhere. My Aunt Sharon, my dad's sister, suddenly appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion on her way to drop off a book for me. She took in the scene. The cops, the flashing lights, Brenda in her ridiculous pink shirt, and she didn't miss a beat. "What in the world?" she said, her voice dripping with dry amusement. "Brenda, honey, pool rules don't work in an ICU." It was so perfectly timed, so absurd, that for a second the tension broke. One of the cops, a stocky guy named Vargas, stifled a laugh. But the moment passed. Grant was not amused. He took another step forward. "Ma'am, let's go." Brenda made a fatal mistake. She tried to push past him to get to the door. Grant moved instantly, grabbing her arm. A scrub tech in blue scrubs caught her other arm, bracing the doorway. It wasn't rough, but it was firm, an immovable object meeting a very stoppable force. She shrieked as if she'd been burned. That's when I finally lost it. All the fear, the exhaustion, the weeks of watching my dad lie there, it all boiled over into one pure, clarifying roar. "She is not family." The shout echoed in the room, cutting through the alarms and the radio static. Everyone froze. Every eye was on me. A nurse on the right clutched the monitor cradle, frozen. In that moment of silence, Officer Grant, his face a mask of disgust, efficiently spun Brenda around and pulled her hands behind her back. The sharp, metallic click-click of the handcuffs snapping shut was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Hospital security held the space. Police took custody seconds later. They walked her into the hall as the strobe still flashed. A rolling vitals cart bumped my hip. A nurse steadied it with one hand and stared at Brenda with the other, eyes wide. Aunt Sharon leaned in, voice low. "Smile for your mugshot, sugar." Brenda twisted toward me. "You'll pay for this." Officer Vargas stepped between us. "Ma'am, look forward." Grant read the order slow and clear. "You are under arrest for trespass and interference in a medical unit." Brenda thrashed once, heels scraping the floor. The scrub tech who grabbed her earlier rubbed his forearm and muttered, "Should have worn the bite gloves." Even in the chaos, someone in housekeeping wheeled by, unplugged a floor buffer, and said to no one, "Wrong plug again," then kept moving. It broke the tension. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was a sound of finality, a sound of consequences. Brenda started to sob, a theatrical, self-pitying wail that fooled no one. "You're all making a terrible mistake," she cried as Grant and Officer Vargas began to escort her out of the room, past the shocked faces of nurses and other patients' families who had gathered in the hall. The alarm was finally silenced. The flashing red light went dark, leaving us in the steady, clinical glow of the room's normal lighting. It felt like the world was breathing again. Clara was already at my dad's side, checking the ventilator connections, her movements swift and sure. "He's stable, Ethan." The machine registered a brief pressure alarm, but it corrected. "You hit that button just in time." I felt my legs start to tremble, the adrenaline deserting me, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I sagged against the wall, the fight gone out of me. The room was clearing out. Aunt Sharon came over and put a steadying hand on my arm. "You did good, kid," she whispered. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. My gaze drifted to the hallway where Officer Vargas was holding up the fake visitor badge Brenda had used. It dangled from his gloved fingers, looking cheap and pathetic. He caught my eye and gave a slight, grim nod. She'd flashed the clergy badge downstairs. During the struggle, she stuffed it into her purse. The other officers were talking to a very pale, very frightened-looking young nurse I recognized as a temp. Officer Vargas walked back to the doorway, his expression all business. He looked directly at me, his voice low and serious. "Mr. Hayes, we need to talk. Now." Downstairs. We ended up in a small, windowless office in the hospital's administrative wing. The air was stale, and the coffee someone handed me tasted like hot brown water. It didn't matter. I wouldn't have tasted it anyway. I was sitting at a cheap conference table across from Officer Vargas, Officer Grant, and head nurse Clara. A man in a suit who introduced himself as the hospital's risk manager was there too, looking grim. The mood was heavy, clinical. This wasn't about shouting anymore. This was about facts. This was about building a case piece by methodical piece. My world-weary side, the part of me that had seen enough of life to know that anger only gets you so far, took over. I needed to be calm. I needed to be clear. My dad's life, and now his justice, depended on it. The risk manager tapped a few keys on his computer, and a series of logs and images appeared on a large monitor on the wall. "All right," he said, his voice clipped. "Let's walk through the timeline." He started with the front desk. Brenda Miller entered the hospital at 3:47 p.m. She presented this badge to the temporary clerk. He clicked, and a high-resolution photo of Brenda's fake badge appeared on the screen. It was a decent forgery at a glance, but up close the font was wrong, and the hospital logo was slightly pixelated. Underneath her name, in bold letters, was the word clergy. I felt a fresh wave of disgust wash over me. She had pretended to be a woman of God to get into a secure wing of a hospital to harm my father. "She's not clergy," I said, my voice flat. "She's the devil in a pink sweater." Officer Grant grunted in agreement. The risk manager continued. "The temp nurse at the front desk today, Sophia Diaz, is new." She scanned the badge. The system, unfortunately, read the barcode as valida guest pass that had not been deactivated from a previous visitor. A clear security lapse we are already addressing. Sophia then escorted Ms. Miller to the ICU floor in violation of our policy, which requires a secondary check-in. He then pulled up the CCTV footage. It was grainy, black and white, but clear enough. There she was, Brenda Miller, walking down the pristine hospital corridor with a purpose that looked chilling in retrospect. She followed the young nurse, Sophia, who kept glancing over her shoulder, her body language radiating nervousness. Then we saw the footage from the camera right outside my dad's room. It showed me leaving, coffee cup in hand. At 3:51 p.m., exactly 1 minute later, the footage showed Sophia swiping her own card to let Brenda into the ICU room. Then Sophia quickly walked away, almost running. She didn't just make a mistake. She was complicit. The risk manager fast-forwarded. "You re-entered the room at 3:58 p.m., he said. The video showed me walking in. Then the view was obscured. We couldn't see inside the room, but we didn't need to. The vent log marks the obstruction to the second." He clicked another button and a different screen appeared. This one was a mess of numbers and graphs. "This is the data log from your father's ventilator," he explained, pointing to a specific line. "It monitors everything: air pressure, Oxygen levels, tidal volume. It's a closed system. It should be perfectly consistent. He traced a green line with his mouse. This is the airflow. See how steady it is? A perfect, rhythmic wave. He stopped at a timestamp, 3:59 p.m. The green line on the graph suddenly, violently dipped. A jagged red spike appeared next to it. That, he said, his voice tight, is a pressure alarm. It means the airflow was obstructed or the tube was disconnected. The machine immediately compensated by increasing pressure, but for 3 seconds, the air supply to your father's lungs was compromised. He then pointed to the next timestamp, 3:59 p.m., and that, he said, is when the code gray was activated. The room was silent. There it was. Not just my word against hers, not just a suspicion. It was cold, hard, irrefutable data. The badge scan, the camera footage, the ventilator logs. A perfect, damning timeline. Security sealed the footage and logs. Risk signed them over to the DA. Can I have copies? I asked. Risk nodded. Through the patient advocate. We'll preserve chain of custody. You'll get certified prints. He printed a receipt and slid it across. Grant set a small evidence bag on the table. Inside was a thumb drive with a red tag. This is the hallway cam poll, he said. Sealed 16-12 hours. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. One line. Drop it or Dad stops breathing for real. I turned the screen so everyone could see. The room went hard and still. The door opened and Detective Callahan stepped in, badge clipped to her belt, eyes already on the screen. Callahan took the phone with 2 fingers, like it was a blade. Good, she said. Now we add threats to the file. She texted a number fast. Digital forensics will pull the SIM and the tower hit. You saved the header by not replying. I hadn't even thought of replying. I just stared at the words and felt something simple, heavy, and sure settle in my chest. We were going to end this. She got in with a fake badge. The nurse let her in. And within seconds of being alone with my dad, she had put her hands on that tube and tried to suffocate him. The breath caught in my throat. I felt sick. My methodical brain had taken over during the presentation of the evidence. But now the gritty, protective son was back in control. The image of her hand, her pale pink nails on that blue tube, was burned into my mind. I had known she was a petty tyrant, a neighborhood bully. I never imagined she was capable of this. I looked at Officer Vargas. His face was like stone. This changes things, he said, his voice low. This isn't just trespassing anymore. He then looked at Clara. The temp nurse, Sophia, the one who let her in. She didn't just make a mistake. She looked scared on that video. She's the weak link in this whole thing. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. We need to talk to her right now, before Brenda Miller's lawyer gets to her first. They put us in another small, sterile room. This one was an unused consultation room with a faint smell of antiseptic. Temp nurse Sophia sat at the table, hunched over, looking impossibly young and fragile. Her face was pale and blotchy from crying, her blue scrubs rumpled. She kept twisting a shredded tissue in her hands, avoiding eye contact with everyone. I was there along with Clara and Officer Grant, but the person in charge now was Detective Callahan. She didn't sit opposite Sophia to intimidate her. Instead, she pulled up a chair beside her, creating a sense of alliance. She spoke softly, her voice devoid of judgment. Sophia, she began, we know you're in a difficult position. We just need you to tell us the truth about what happened tonight. Sophia started with the story she had clearly rehearsed in her head, the same weak excuses she'd probably given the first officers. Her voice was a watery whisper. I was so busy. We were short-staffed. She came to the desk. She had a badge. She said she was a family friend, a minister. I was just trying to be helpful. I didn't see the badge clearly. I made a mistake. Detective Callahan let her finish, not interrupting once. She just nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the young nurse's face. When Sophia trailed off into a sniffle, Callahan leaned in slightly. I understand being busy, Sophia, but I've seen your file. You're a good nurse, top of your class. You're trained to notice details. Her badge said clergy, but she was wearing a pink knit top and designer pants, not a collar. You're observant. I think you saw that badge very clearly. Callahan paused, letting the silence hang in the air. And I think you were scared. You looked scared on the security camera. Tell me why. That was all it took. The gentle pressure, the acknowledgement that she wasn't just incompetent but afraid, broke the dam. Sophia let out a gut-wrenching sob, her whole body shaking. The shredded tissue was useless. Clara slid a fresh box of them across the table. Through her tears, she fumbled for her purse, pulling out her phone with trembling hands. She unlocked it, and pushed it across the table toward the detective. "She's been threatening me," Sophia choked out. "For weeks." Detective Callahan picked up the phone. Officer Grant and I leaned in, our reflections staring back at us from the dark screen before it lit up. The text messages were all there, a horrifying chronicle of manipulation and coercion. It started small. Sophia lived in our neighborhood in a small condo she rented. Brenda Miller, as HOA president, had found out through the community directory that Sophia was a nurse, and then found out where she worked. The first texts were about bogus HOA violations. A picture of Sophia's small patio with a message: "Your wind chimes are not on the approved list. $100 fine." Another one: "Your car is leaking oil on the asphalt. $250 fine," and a formal warning. Then the threats escalated. Brenda had discovered Sophia was a temp nurse, working on a probationary contract with the hospital. A new text came. "A letter of complaint to your nursing agency about your conduct in the community could be very damaging to your career prospects, couldn't it?" Sophia had been terrified of losing her job, of getting an eviction notice. She had been paying the fines, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. Then, about a week ago, after my dad was admitted, the messages took a sinister turn. "I see your patient list. Ethan Hayes' father," one text read. "He's the one causing all the trouble with the special assessment. He's costing everyone money." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a random act of insanity. This was motive. This was calculated. The final set of messages, sent just that afternoon, laid it all out. "You work his floor today? Get me in after 3:30 p.m. I need to have a prayer with him." Followed by a chillingly casual message: "He's the reason for the whole problem. If the problem goes away, everyone is better off." And then the last one, the one that made me feel like I was going to be physically sick, sent at 3:40 p.m., just minutes before she arrived. "Just a little tug on the tube. It will look like an accident. No one will know, and all your fines will disappear." The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of Sophia's ragged breathing. All my anger towards her evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard fury directed solely at Brenda Miller. She hadn't just tried to kill my dad. She had systematically destroyed this young woman's peace of mind, backing her into an impossible corner. Detective Callahan slowly looked up from the phone, her calm expression now overlaid with a layer of tempered steel. She made eye contact with me, and her next words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "This just went from trespassing and assault to conspiracy and attempted murder." The next 48 hours were a blur of legal paperwork and police statements. Brenda was arrested, booked, and to my utter disbelief, she made bail. Her husband posted a bond so high it could have funded a small country. Apparently, their little HOA kingdom was built on some serious money. Her lawyer was slick, expensive, and immediately started spinning a narrative to the press about a distraught and overzealous neighbor being railroaded by a grieving and unstable son. It made my skin crawl. My first and only priority was creating a legal fortress around my dad. I met with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman my aunt recommended. We didn't waste time. We filed for an emergency protective order. The evidence was so overwhelming: the police report, the ventilator data, the text messages, that a judge granted it immediately without a hearing. It was a piece of paper, but it felt like a shield. I thought, naively, that it would be enough. I thought even she wasn't arrogant enough to test a direct court order. I was wrong. I was in the main hospital lobby 2 days later, grabbing a coffee from the little cafe, trying to feel some semblance of normalcy. The morning sun was streaming through the huge glass windows. People were coming and going, doctors on their rounds, families visiting, volunteers pushing carts. It was a world away from the hushed tension of the ICU. Then the automatic doors slid open, and my stomach plummeted. In walked Brenda Miller. She was wearing a different pink top, this one a pale, almost defiant rose color. Her hair was perfect, her makeup immaculate. She looked like she was on her way to a luncheon, not like someone who had just been charged with attempted murder. She walked just a few feet inside, stopping well short of the security desk, but well inside the building. A smug, challenging smirk played on her lips as her eyes found mine across the lobby. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was standing just inside the door, daring me, proving that a piece of paper couldn't stop her. She was testing the boundaries, testing me. My first instinct was to scream, to run at her, to cause a scene. But my methodical, world-weary side took over. Don't give her the satisfaction, I told myself. Don't become the unstable son her lawyer is talking about. I didn't shout. I didn't even move towards her. I simply pulled out my phone, turned my back to her slightly, and dialed 911. My voice was calm, almost detached as I spoke to the dispatcher. Yes, hello? I'd like to report a violation of a restraining order. The subject's name is Brenda Miller. The location is the main lobby of St. Michael's Hospital. I gave the case number for the order. I could feel her eyes burning into my back. She hadn't expected this. She had expected a shouting match, a confrontation she could twist. She didn't expect calm, bureaucratic efficiency. As it happened, Officer Grant was just finishing up an interview for the final police report inside the hospital's security office. He heard the call go out over his personal radio. 90 seconds later, he strode into the lobby. He didn't even have to look for her. He saw me on the phone, and his eyes immediately scanned the entrance and landed on Brenda. The look on his face was one of profound, undiluted disgust. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and tired. "You are under arrest." Again, the lobby went quiet. People stared, their coffee cups frozen halfway to their lips. Brenda's smirk dissolved. "This is harassment," she sputtered. I was just dropping something off." Officer Grant didn't even blink. "You're in violation of a court order. Put your hands behind your back. By court order, 100 yards. No contact. No entry." Brenda didn't move. For 3 long beats, she tried to win with eyes. The gift shop clerk froze with a balloon in his hand that read, "Get well soon." A little kid dropped a plush bear. You could hear the thud. "Hands," Grant repeated. His tone didn't rise. It dropped. That did it. Brenda spun a weak story. "I was returning a casserole." The clerk blinked. "Ma'am, this is a hospital, not a potluck." A few people snorted. Grant cuffed her smooth and read the TRO terms so the whole lobby heard them. He nodded to me without looking away from her. "Stay on the line with dispatch." I did. "Yes, officer," I told the phone, calm as stone. "Yes, I am safe. Yes, I'll wait for the report number." Brenda looked small then, not a queen, just a person in a bad suit with no power left. The next day, we were in a sterile, imposing courtroom for an emergency bail hearing. Brenda was there in a wrinkled pantsuit, her expensive lawyer beside her. I sat with the prosecutor assigned to the case, a sharp, impeccably dressed man named D.A. Sharma. Sharma laid out the facts to the judge, a stern older woman named Judge Castillo. He spoke about the original charges, and then he described with icy precision Brenda's blatant violation of the protective order. "Your Honor," Sharma argued, his voice ringing with authority, "the defendant was given a clear, unambiguous order by this court. Less than 24 hours later, she chose to willfully and arrogantly disregard it. She is not just a danger to the victims and his family. She is demonstrating a profound contempt for the legal system itself. She is testing the system, Your Honor, to see what she can get away with." Judge Castillo stared down from the bench, her eyes fixed on Brenda, her expression unreadable. Brenda's lawyer stood up and began to make excuses, but the judge held up a hand, silencing him. She looked at Brenda, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in Brenda's eyes. Judge Castillo's voice was low, but it filled the courtroom. "Bail is revoked. You will be remanded into custody until the date of your trial." The sharp, loud crack of her gavel was like a thunderclap. It was the sound of a door slamming shut for good. The news of Brenda's second arrest and revoked bail spread through our neighborhood like wildfire. She had ruled the community through fear and intimidation for so long that the idea of her being powerless, truly powerless, in a jail cell was seismic. I was home for a few hours trying to get some real sleep in my own bed when the doorbell rang. On my porch was my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Dawson, a sweet retired librarian who had lived on our street for 40 years. She was clutching a worn manila folder to her chest, as if it were a life raft. Her hands were trembling slightly. "Ethan," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I heard what happened at the hospital. I am so sorry about your father. I think this might be related. I was always too scared to say anything before." She handed me the folder. I opened it right there on the porch. Inside were letters printed on official-looking HOA letterhead, all signed by Brenda Miller. There were fines for things that defied logic. A $500 fine for an improperly stored garden hose. A $200 fine for non-conforming welcome mat coloration. A formal letter threatening legal action because the small windshield her late husband had given her was producing an unauthorized decibel level. It was insanity. It was extortion. "My dad was helping you with this, wasn't he?" I asked, looking at the dates on the letters. They corresponded exactly with the time he started organizing the meetings about the special assessment for the new gate. Mrs. Dawson nodded, her eyes filling with tears. He was the only one brave enough to stand up to her. He was going to speak for all of us at the next meeting. Before I could even fully process what she was showing me, another neighbor, Mr. Wallace from across the street, came walking over, also holding a folder. Then the Morenos from 2 doors down. Within an hour, my quiet living room had turned into a makeshift command center. My coffee table was buried under a mountain of folders, each one a testament to Brenda Miller's reign of petty terror. The stories were all the same. She targeted the elderly, new families, single parents, anyone she perceived as unable or unwilling to fight back. The reasons for the fines were absurd. Holiday decorations left up 2 days too late. A basketball hoop stored on the side of a garage instead of inside. Grass that was 1/4 of an inch too high. It was a systematic campaign of harassment designed to crush any dissent and fund her pet projects with the revenue from bogus fines. The common thread was my dad. Every person in that room had at some point spoken to my father about fighting back. He had been building a coalition. He had been gathering their stories, their folders. Brenda hadn't just attacked him because of a personal grudge. She had tried to cut the head off the snake. She saw my dad not as a person, but as an obstacle to her power and her money. My Aunt Sharon arrived with a pot of coffee and a box of donuts, her practical nature taking over. She looked at the piles of paper, at the anxious faces of our neighbors, and shook her head. "This isn't a homeowners association," she declared to the room. "It's a protection racket with better landscaping." That broke the tension. For the next few hours, we worked. We built a mountain of evidence. It was clear we had more than enough for a massive class action lawsuit to recover every cent she had stolen from us. Then Mr. Wallace, a former union organizer, slapped his hand on the table. "A lawsuit is good," he said, his voice booming. "But it's not enough. We need to take back our community. We need to recall her as president." The idea was electric. It shot through the room, turning fear and frustration into empowerment. We had the votes. We had the bylaws on our side. We could do it. We could erase her from our lives completely. I looked at the digital mountain of evidence we had just compiled on my laptop screen. It was damning. But I knew in this fight for the soul of our neighborhood, we needed more than just spreadsheets and financial records. We needed something visceral, something undeniable. A new plan began to form in my mind, a way to ensure that everyone, even her last few supporters, saw her for exactly what she was. She didn't just try to hurt my dad, I said to the room, my voice low and intense. She's been hurting all of us for years. The recall meeting is in 1 week, and I have an idea for a presentation she'll never forget. The community clubhouse was a simple 1-room building, usually reserved for potlucks and children's birthday parties. That night, it was a courtroom. It was packed, with people standing along the back walls and spilling out onto the patio. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and a nervous, collective energy. Brenda's few remaining allies, mostly board members she had handpicked, were huddled in a corner, looking deeply uncomfortable. They knew they were on the losing side of history. At the front of the room, I stood next to a small table with my laptop and a projector aimed at a large pull-down screen. I felt strangely calm. My methodical preparation had given me a sense of control. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about presenting an airtight case. I started with the finances. I had created charts and graphs, projecting them onto the screen. I walked the audience through the numbers, showing the sudden, massive spike in fine revenue over the past 2 years. I showed them the contracts for the new gate project, awarded without a competitive bid to a company owned by Brenda's brother-in-law. It was dry, it was boring, and it was utterly damning. People in the audience were murmuring, shaking their heads, their suspicions finally confirmed in black and white. After 20 minutes of financial data, I paused and took a sip of water. The room was quiet, attentive. But this was never just about money, I said, my voice dropping, becoming more personal. It was never about the length of your grass or the color of your welcome mat. It's about what happens when one person has too much unchecked power and not enough humanity. I clicked to the next slide. It was a blank black screen. It's about what that person is willing to do to keep that power. I reached into my pocket and clicked the small remote I was holding. The screen flickered to life. There was no sound, only the grainy, silent, black and white footage from the security camera outside my dad's ICU room. The audience leaned forward. They watched the silent video of the woman in the familiar pink top walking purposefully down the hall. They saw her slip into the room. A few seconds passed, seconds that felt like an eternity. Then they saw the interior of the room through the window in the door. They saw her lean over the bed. They saw her hand reach for the ventilator tube. They saw my fuzzy image burst back into the room. And they saw me lunge for the wall. A collective, horrified gasp swept through the room. It was a physical thing, a wave of shock and revulsion. Hearing about it on the news was one thing. Seeing it, even in grainy, silent video, was something else entirely. It made it real. The projector blinked and went black. A groan rolled through the room. Her audio crackled. She let out a little laugh. "Technical issues," she said. Aunt Sharon didn't miss a beat. "Unplug the coffee pot," she called. Mr. Wallace yanked a cord from a power strip. The screen popped on. The code gray light flashed big and red. The crowd clapped like a dam broke. I raised a hand. "Stay with me," I said. "We are almost done." I clicked to the next slide. The text filled the wall. Gasps. A chair scraped. Someone whispered, "My God." Brenda's lawyer fumbled with the speakerphone. She talked over him into the mic. "Lies," she screamed. The two officers at the back didn't move, but both of them looked at each other with the same tired face I had seen in the ICU. Disgust. Mr. Wallace started a low chant at the edge of the crowd. "Vote, vote, vote." It spread like fire. I let the image of the flashing code gray light pulse on the screen for a moment. Then I clicked again. The screen changed to display the text messages between Brenda and Nurse Sophia, blown up in huge, stark white letters against a black background. I read them aloud. "He's the reason for the whole problem. If the problem goes away, everyone is better off." The room was deathly silent. Just a little tug on the tube. "It will look like an accident." Someone in the front row started to cry softly. Brenda was patched in on a recorded jail phone line, allowed 10 supervised minutes. Her voice cut in, tight and angry. As my words hung in the air, she finally snapped. "It's fake," she began to scream, her voice distorted in a rush of rage. "That video is edited. Those texts are fabricated. They're all conspiring against me because they're jealous. He's lying." Her lawyer, a man in a rumpled suit, was frantically whispering at her, trying to get her to be quiet. But it was too late. The mask of the calm, competent community leader was not just off, it had been incinerated. Everyone in that room, the entire neighborhood, was seeing the raw, unhinged monster that lay beneath. In the back of the clubhouse, 2 uniformed police officers stood, their presence required by the city for any contentious public meeting. I watched as they looked from the ranting voice on the speakerphone to the damning texts on the projector screen. They didn't speak. They just exchanged a look of pure, professional disgust. One of them slowly shook his head, a silent judgment that spoke volumes. The vote for the recall was a mere formality after that. It was unanimous. As the new interim president, a relieved-looking Mrs. Dawson, announced the result to a round of applause, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from Detective Callahan, who I had told about the meeting. The message was short and to the point. It read, "D.A. Sharma was just informed by the officers on site about her outburst. He's adding witness intimidation and tampering with a public meeting to the list of charges." That night, patrol pulled over Brenda's helper, a gray sedan that had been circling our block. In the trunk, a bag of tools, gloves, and a loaded pistol under a rag. Callahan called me at 2 a.m. "We're adding conspiracy and weapons charges on the helper," she said. Forensics matched the threat text to a prepaid SIM in his glove box. I pinged your block that night," she said. "Sleep. We've got the rest." I finally did. For 2 hours. It was the best sleep in weeks. The district attorney's office was on the top floor of the county courthouse, a place of polished wood, hushed tones, and the serious weight of the law. I sat across a large, imposing desk from D.A. Sharma. He was, as always, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, and he didn't waste a single word. On a large whiteboard behind him, he had already begun to write. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "Thank you for coming in. Given the defendant's behavior at the recall meeting, I wanted to walk you through the full, consolidated list of charges we will be pursuing. We are no longer looking at a simple assault. We are building an ironclad case." He turned to the whiteboard and uncapped a black marker. What followed was a systematic, brutal dismantling of Brenda Miller's life and liberty. He wrote each charge on the board, underlining it with a firm, decisive stroke of the pen. The list grew, each new line adding another layer of concrete to the prison cell she was digging for herself. "First," he said, "attempted murder in the first degree." The text messages to the nurse clearly established premeditation. "This is our top charge." He wrote it down. Click. "Second, tampering with a medical life support device. It's a specific felony in this state designed for exactly this kind of situation. The ventilator logs are our proof. It's an open and shut case. Click. The list went on. Forgery, for the creation of the fake clergy badge. Criminal impersonation, to gain access to a healthcare facility. Conspiracy to commit a felony, with nurse Sophia Diaz, who as you know has agreed to testify for the state in exchange for a plea agreement on lesser charges. He paused, looking at me. Then we have assault on a vulnerable adult in a medical facility. He added the new ones. Witness intimidation, based on her recorded jail phone outburst during the community meeting. And finally, based on the incredible documentation you and your neighbors provided. We are adding 2 counts of felony extortion and 1 count of scheme to defraud to the indictment. He capped the marker and turned back to face me. The whiteboard was filled. It looked less like a list of charges and more like an anchor. It's a mountain, I said, a little stunned by the sheer weight of it all. That's the idea, Sharma replied with a thin, confident smile. We are making absolutely sure she can't climb out from under it. We want to send a message. A week later, we were back in court for a final pretrial hearing. It was a different Brenda Miller who was led into the courtroom. She was wearing a standardized, faded orange prison jumpsuit. Her perfect blonde bob was gone. Her hair was limp and greasy, pulled back in a sad little ponytail. Without her power suits, her makeup, and her title, she looked small, pathetic, and terrified. Her lawyer, looking flustered, made a desperate last-ditch attempt to argue for bail. He talked about her deep ties to the community and how she was not a flight risk. I sat in the gallery with Aunt Sharon, who leaned over and whispered in my ear, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The only thing she's tied to is a freight train of consequences, and it's running right on time. Judge Castillo listened patiently to the lawyer's arguments, her face an impassive mask. Then she looked at the new, multi-page indictment that DA Sharma had submitted. She read through the list of charges, her expression growing progressively grimmer. She looked up from the papers, her gaze falling on Brenda, who seemed to shrink under the weight of it. "Counselor," the judge said to Brenda's lawyer, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "Your client was already remanded for violating a direct order from this court while out on bail. Now, the state has presented a superseding indictment that includes new, credible evidence of witness intimidation in addition to multiple felonies related to extortion and fraud." She let that hang in the air for a moment. Given the overwhelming evidence, the sheer gravity of these compiled charges, and the defendant's demonstrated contempt for the rule of law, this court finds that she remains a significant and ongoing threat to the community and to the integrity of this judicial process. She looked directly at Brenda. The previous order of remand stands. No bail. The finality in her voice was absolute. Brenda's face, which had been a mask of strained hope, completely crumpled. The last shred of her belief that her money, her status, or her slick lawyer could save her just evaporated in the sterile air of the courtroom. For the very first time since this whole nightmare began, she looked truly, hopelessly afraid. The judge looked down at her calendar. The trial date is set for 4 weeks from today. The end was in sight. The trial was a masterclass in prosecutorial efficiency. DA Sharma had told me he planned to build the case brick by brick, leaving the jury no other option than to convict, and he was true to his word. It was methodical, logical, and completely overwhelming. Karen's defense was anemic from the start. They tried to paint me as a hysterical son with a grudge. They tried to claim Brenda was just a misunderstood, overbearing neighbor. And they even tried to suggest the texts were some kind of bizarre, unfunny joke. The jury, a panel of 12 ordinary citizens, just stared back at them with blank, disbelieving faces. Sharma started with the evidence. It was cold, hard, and undeniable. First, he played the silent ICU security video on a giant screen in the courtroom. The jurors were transfixed. You could have heard a pin drop as they watched the grainy footage of the woman in pink, reaching for the tube that was keeping my father alive. No shouting, no chaos, just the cold, silent, premeditated act. Next, he called an expert witness, an engineer from the ventilator company. The engineer calmly and clearly explained the data logs, showing the jury the graph with the sudden, violent dip in air pressure. He pointed to the timestamp on the log and the corresponding timestamp on the video. They matched perfectly. Then came the texts. Sharma displayed them on the same giant screen. The words "in the problem" and just a little tug on the tube hung in the air, damning and absolute. The jury read them, and I could see their expressions hardening, shifting from neutral observation to quiet fury. After the physical evidence came the human element, the witnesses. Nurse Sophia was the first major one. She was terrified, crying on the stand, but she held it together. Through her tears, she told the jury how Brenda had threatened and manipulated her for weeks. She read her own texts aloud, her voice cracking with shame and fear. The jury didn't see a criminal co-conspirator. They saw a victim. Then it was my turn. I sat in the witness box, looked at the jury, and simply told the truth. I described the sounds of the ICU, the exhaustion, the fear, and the moment I saw her hand on that tube. Brenda's lawyer tried to trip me up on cross-examination, asking about my father's disputes with the HOA. I simply replied, yes, they disagreed about a new gate. My father didn't think that was a death penalty offense. A few jurors nodded. Officer Grant testified about the arrest, the fake badge, and Brenda's arrogant violation of the restraining order. Mrs. Dawson and 2 other neighbors testified about the years of extortion and threats, methodically establishing a clear motive of power and greed. With every witness, another brick was placed in the wall of Brenda's guilt. The closing arguments were a study in contrasts. Brenda's lawyer was loud and blustery, talking about community disputes and misunderstandings. D.A. Sharma was quiet, calm, and surgically precise. He walked in front of the jury box, his hands clasped behind his back. This case is not about a garden hose, he said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. It is not about a welcome mat or a new gate. This is about a woman who wrapped herself in the petty authority of a 3-ring binder and believed it made her a queen. A woman who believed her power gave her the right to decide who gets to live and who gets to die. She did not see a sick man in that hospital bed. She saw a problem, and she decided. He paused, making eye contact with each juror, to end it. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were grim and set. I held my breath, my hand gripping Aunt Sharon's. The foreman, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt, stood up and handed the verdict form to the bailiff. He refused to look at Brenda. The clerk read the verdict. On the charge of attempted murder in the 1st degree, we the jury find the defendant, a pause that stretched for an eternity, guilty. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. One by one, the clerk read the verdicts for the other major charges. Tampering with a medical device, guilty. Forgery, guilty. Conspiracy, guilty. Extortion, guilty. At the sentencing a week later, Judge Castillo delivered the final blow. She spoke of the sanctity of a hospital, the vulnerability of the sick, and the absolute depravity of Brenda's actions. She sentenced her to 8 years in state prison. She ordered her to pay full restitution with interest to every single resident she had defrauded over the years. Then she added 2 final, extraordinary conditions. First, a lifetime ban on non-patient entry to hospitals. She may enter only for her own documented care, under escort. And second, a permanent statewide injunction barring her from serving on any HOA or condo board, with any violation punishable as contempt. The gavel fell with a loud, resounding crack. It was over. Justice, real and absolute, had been served. The court recorded a restitution judgment lien against her home and accounts until every dollar was paid. Interest accrues monthly until satisfied. 6 months later, the world sounds different. The incessant, anxious beeping of the ICU has been replaced by the soft grunts of effort and the encouraging voice of a physical therapist named Sarah. We're in the hospital's rehabilitation wing, a bright, sunny room filled with exercise equipment and the quiet determination of people fighting their way back to their lives. My dad is one of them. He's in a wheelchair, and he's still weak. The ventilator left his voice a scratchy, weak rasp, but he's alive, and he's fighting. I watch as he grips a small 2-pound dumbbell, his arm trembling with the effort, his face a mask of concentration. Slowly, painstakingly, he manages to lift it to his shoulder. He lets out a breath and a small, wry smile touches his lips. He looks over at me. Still, he rasps, pausing to catch his breath, stronger than Brenda's legal defense. I can't help but laugh. That dry, stubborn humor, the thing that always saw him through the worst of times, was back. It was the best sound I had ever heard. That's how I knew, deep in my bones, that he was going to be okay. It would be a long road, but we were on it together. The fallout came fast. With Brenda gone, the dark cloud lifted. Our class action settled. Her husband wrote one big check. Every family got refunds and damages. Her SUV and lake cabin went up for sale to satisfy the judgment. The notice ran in the weekend paper. It wasn't only money. It was proof we were right. Mrs. Dawson became HOA president. We rewrote the bylaws. Simple, fair, in plain words. Posted big at the pool. The tape measure rain ended. The street feels calm. Neighbors talk. Kids leave bikes on the grass. No threat letters. It's a neighborhood again. Aunt Sharon still visits Dad, always with some wild 1970s Jell-O mold. She tapped the new rules and said, "See? Rules should help people, not crown a bully." She was right. We took a system built for control and turned it back to service. We got our peace of mind back. Today, I pushed Dad down our street at sunset. He's tired, but he breathes easy. I think of the ICU, the court days, and our block standing as one. How far will a man go to guard his own? All the way. You keep going until they are safe and the wrong is made right. Titles are paper. Love is steel.